Bezos was going to be the first entrepreneur in human history to put a book online to sell. No matter how much money he could spend on books, there's a lot more books than there was money to buy and store those books. So what was going to be the first book to ever be purchased online? What if he picked the wrong kind of book? Does he pick the popular books that sell volume, or does he pick that rare book that nobody else can find at a store, at a Barnes & Noble? Nobody knows. Jeff Bezos doesn't know. Nobody knows. So what does Jeff Bezos do? He recognizes that as the #1 risk in starting Amazon. Unlike the MBAs in the business school, remember I did an MBA, so I can make fun of my people, but unlike that, what he did was essentially ran an experiment like a scientist. He created a website, took a whole bunch of pictures of books that he did not own, went to bookstores and said, hey, I'm going to catalog all your books, and if someone buys something from my online store, I'll come here and pick it up. And every time he did this, he lost a few dollars. Right? Maybe someone who purchased a book for 20 bucks, he might lose $5 because he was buying it at the price point of the store, right? So he was actually losing money, but he didn't lose $10 million overnight, right? And he was getting customers, and the customers were telling him, hey, these are the books that we would come to an online store for. And he was able to figure that out because he was able to cast a wide net of an array of books that he didn't own. He just created thumbnails, right? What's the cost of that, right? And like a scientist, he calculated that risk. And if you, show of hands, do you think you guys could have pulled that off? Think about it, right? Come on, right? It's pretty easy, right? A website with like thumbnails of books, and then a few flyers, right? There's nothing magic about it, right? But it was a process, it was a way of thinking, minimizing risk. I have, who knows Zappos? It was acquired by Bezos for $1 billion, Zappos, the shoe store. Same story, exact same story. Didn't buy a single shoe, went to all the shoe stores, took pictures, made a catalog, and then Zappos took off and was acquired by Bezos for $1 billion. Netflix. It was actually a DVD delivery system, right? And there's a video of Reed Hastings talking about this online. And he essentially explains this in very simple terms. He said, I had this idea for an online catalog of DVDs that people can buy or rent. And the problem was I wasn't sure if these DVDs would break in the mail. So I was afraid to get started. So I decided to take a bunch of DVDs, package it and send it to all my cousins across North America, and then have them send it to other people and have these DVDs bounce around the country. And then I remember the day when those DVDs arrived back to my house, and I opened the first package and the DVD was not broken. This is his face lit up. Open the second package, the DVD was not broken. Third package, this sucker is going to work. And this is literally verbatim what he said, right? So serial entrepreneurs are not big, bold risk takers, especially the ones who take the time to figure out what's unique in the world and build their skills to that point, and then tries to push into a new category. They're masters of risk, and they minimize risk. And I'll leave with the last one of the greatest achievements in mankind, right? Human flight. And what was really crazy about this was during the time of the Wright brothers, there were other people, well-funded, pursuing the same thing. This is not an invention. This is an innovation. Because they didn't create new technology. They were just like the iPhone. They were wielding existing technologies in a way to create man-made flight. And the Wright brothers were not anything special. They were actually guys who built bicycles, and they were really good at it, right? And so there were bigger names all over the news, and who claimed that, and those guys, what did they do? They did it MBA style. They had a big garage, they had a beautiful design, they had some great designers, designed these planes that looked like birds, and then they got the funding, and they were all over the news, and they went right in, and they built these things, and then they took it off, and it would just crash. And this was going on and on and on. Believe me, Henry Ford has the exact same story with the Ford Model T. And what these guys did, first and foremost, they said, okay, we need to have, the wind keeps changing every time we run out our experiment. So we need to find a place where the wind is consistent, and the planes are consistent. So they went to this place called Kitty Hawk, which, by the way, is the worst place to live. And they would go there every summer, and there was flies and all kinds of terrible, like pesticide pesticides, all kinds of interesting things going on over there. But they went there because the wind and weather never changed, and there was a consistent like playing field where they can, so that variable was controlled for. They were minimizing risk. Did they build the plane? No, they didn't build the plane. The next thing they did was they invented this thing called the wind tunnel. They were the inventors of the wind tunnel, which was a miniaturized tunnel where they were blowing wind through a fan, and they were testing like model wings. They weren't sure what kind of wing would work, and they didn't want to build the entire thing. And it was too expensive because they weren't funded, man. Everyone else was funded. These guys were using their money from the bicycle business. Right? And so they were testing, and if you go to Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Museum, you can see these things there. And finally, like this, I can go through the list, but there's so many. And they kept inch by inch, experiment by experiment, they minimized, ran these little experiments. And entrepreneurship is really like that. That's what Lean Startup is trying to teach. And there's others as well, but it is not high risk. It is a different risk calculation. And I'll leave with Jeff Bezos, still innovates today. And he says this about innovators. He says it's the equivalent of difference between an innovator and an operator. An operator is someone who has to execute something that's already proved. So if you have to cook dinner tonight, I mean, you're not like innovation, and if people are depending on you, you're not going to innovate, right? Like you have to create a meal, you have guests coming over, you're not going to run an experiment on something that might turn out to be a disaster. That's an operator. So the world runs by things that have to work, and people who understand that domain and master it and deliver that service. That's what they get paid for. That's what most of our jobs in the world turns based on that. The innovation guy thinks like this. Imagine you're at playing baseball. You're up to bat, and you have 10 swings. Every swing, you lose $1. But you figured out, you were watching the game long enough to notice that 1 out of 10 swings, you make $1,000. So what do? You swing, and you lose $9 because 1 out of the 10 will give you 1,000. And so that's how these guys think. They systematically run experiments because they have this underlying educated guess that there's something in here. I just have to quickly dig around and find it. And that's the innovation process, and that's what it's like. I spoke about Netflix. I spoke about Thing. I've given you sort of really high level. I hope this is the beginning of many conversations in CTCC. But I'm going to leave with one last thing, which is the map. You've got the GPS, you've got the compass, you got the plans for the long journey, right? And you got a sense of finding your purpose and what the elements of that need to be. Lastly, a map, and I'm going to whip through this and then wrap up. But if you go through the history of tool making, it started this way with our ancestors being hunter-gatherers, right? And what was really fascinating was every single person, every single family was responsible for all of those needs, right? Water, food, shelter. And we were just responsible for finding that, right? The average lifespan was definitely under 30, right? People, infant mortality, very high, right? Lots of things about this life was not so great. You'd have to sleep with your one eye open. Some days you would not have food, your family would die. It was not the greatest period of our early days, but this was the way the life was set up. We invented one of the first great tools of mankind, arguably more important than the internet. We invented communication, a common language of sounds and codes. It's like programming, a set of codes that we all use to communicate ideas. And it lit up society. And they started to come up with incredible ideas. One of the first was to organize itself, right? Okay, how about you take care of the water thing? I'll go, I can build houses, I can do this. And you over there go and get us food. And we started to create specializations and special jobs. And this was one of the biggest breakthroughs because it created efficiencies and it created better and better experiences. And more people started doing this. And eventually society started to take shape and build its first civilization, right? This is our story. This is part of the map, right? And it was much better, arguably, than the hunter-gatherer period. Lifestyles changed, infant mortality and death rates dropped, right? Lifespan increased, health, wealth, all kinds of things happened. This was a really great idea. Sorry, behind that graphic was clothing, behind that graphic was transportation, and behind that graphic was actually entertainment. As we started doing this, we started having more time, and there were more interesting things that we could do, and so more and more interesting types of categories started to form. And in those categories, different tools started to form, and society evolved a little bit more. And this was not so long ago. This concept continued to expand today, And if you think about, these are still the major aspects of what fuel the engine of today's civilization, right? And if you look within each of these categories, water became drinking, sanitation, irrigation, cleaning, right? Like, we take this for granted, but somebody had to put that first irrigation system that fuels our crops, or the toilet that allows us to flush the toilet. These are all different systems, but it was a derivative of experts who get specialized in the art of water and transporting water and preserving water, right? And like that, for clothing and food and travel and home and fun, these industries started creating. We started creating tool makers, pioneers, people who started inventing things and bringing it into the mass market. And this is how we arrived here, right? So all that's missing really is a few things. How do we track all this exchange of value and goods? And we talked about finance, and that also had its own journey, right? We used to exchange, we used to barter and trade these goods and services. Then we started counting them. It was more efficient. So we started with shells and salt. The Romans used salt as money, and it evolved eventually to digital currency, right? Obviously, fast forwarding. So that created an entire industry called finance. And that in and of itself has its own tools that tool makers contributed to. But then we had new problems that needed to be solved. This new modern society had different types of issues, right? Power structures that caused modern slavery or joblessness, violence, right? Disease. And so we needed to solve these problems, and we did with rule of law, modern medicine, freedoms and rights, governance, right? Public education, and that created government. And the other industries feed that, right? This is the map, right? And somebody had to come up with these ideas, the democratic system, The UK was the first to create limited liability, which allowed people to gather together and then come up with a business plan, and then if it failed, nobody could sue the people in their personal, and that allowed business to grow. And these are ideas, these are tools that sit on top of each other that contribute to the society we live in today. So this is essentially the map. And how do these new bubbles form, right? How do these pioneers do this? When you take this one circle, or I have 3 more slides, we're done. Take this one circle over here under movies, right? One of the great tools was the projector, the thing we are using right now, right? And somebody had this wild idea that I can create an entire experience, like a Shakespearean play, that they were so familiar with, and I don't need the actors. I can put it on the stage and pay people, and they'll get that same experience. And people thought that was crazy, because those plays were really amazing at that time, right? And this crazy person tried to do this, and it took probably a while to get this right. You had to create this production and pioneered the first movie cuts and scenes and all of that stuff that we take for granted. And once they organized that in a new, unique way, through that risk minimization strategy, they eventually created their first movie. And that thing took off and people came, right? And now we have this massive movie industry. And we have Cineplex and Famous Player. And then just thinking about, unfortunately, this is all in PDF, there's a slide behind this. Within the movie industry, another little industry group, this guy named Walt Disney, who said, hey, I can create cartoons that you see in newspapers, make them animate, because he saw some of these animations take off, and I could create an entire movie out of that. And they laughed at that guy and his team, right? And he got these cartoonists who were just drawers, an artist, and he got them in a room and he got live animals and showed them what this new art form looked like in animation, how to make these characters come to life, how to create sound effects for the movie. He started melding live cinema techniques with animation, and he was the first of all the animators to create a whole movie experience. And he believed, his vision was, that I can make you fall in love with these characters. And believe me when I tell you this, that was laughable at the time. He was ridiculed for the concept, and not everyone followed him. But look at this. Look at our childhood characters that this company brought to life, right? And so that is kind of the process of how these things come to be. And I have just one last question. I've just walked you through 5,000 years of tool making and industry building, and things changed quite drastically, right? So is this what it's going to look like tomorrow, guys? Right? Show of hands if you think it's going to change drastically again. And I've done my job, right? And that's really what you got to keep your eye on. And we're experiencing in a technological revolution, exponential growth and progress, and there's going to be a new breed of entrepreneurs and these magicians that we once treated like gods. How did they do these things? is going to become commonplace in our vernacular. Either you're going to be them, or you're going to know people who are, and you're going to be working with them. But this is what I think is ahead of us, and it's an exciting time, and I thank you again for giving me the chance to talk today, and I hope there will be many more conversations like this.